So welcome to our workshop. Let's give it a second and let people join. Let's give it a second. All right, let us begin. So the purpose of this workshop, as always, is to give you a short intro so you can start improving things in your business. So the theory is kept to the minimum, and so we can move quickly through the slides, and you can go to work and rejoin me next week. All right. So let's start. The simple arrangement is, of the sections is we'll have a short intro, we'll do it and discuss next steps, right? So the intro. When you have zero time to work on projects, the most important thing for you is to figure out where to start, where it provides the most positive benefits for your business. Because the workshop is, the workshop is boost your cash flow, right? So where do we actually start? So if you've heard before people referring to lead to order to cash, as similar, sub-process, I prefer to see all of it as one big process, lead to cash, right? So lead to order means, for example, salesperson brings a lead, nurtures it, gets it to the order part, where customer places an order, right? Then accounting and boarding, whoever takes over, they send out invoices and customer pays, right? I want to see that as a one single ecosystem, because everyone in the company needs to understand that we are all in sales. Okay, so let's continue and we'll clarify that more. So we do agree that we need to improve things. All right, what's the next step? This is usually when I introduce the concept of business process mapping, right? And the room immediately turns into business process mapping. And the entire room tunes you out. No one listens. What is the reason for that? And the reason is usually that most of you, when you think of business process mapping, this is what you envision. You envision some complicated, convoluted process no one understands. You require 1,000 consultants to create it for you, the flow charts. You need another 1,000 consultants to explain to you what they mean. You need another 1,000 consultants to figure out how to execute on it, right? The time has passed, money wasted, opportunities lost. There's really no benefit, right? So the business process mapping is not for us to look busy, right? It's for us to produce actionable information, something we can act on right away, right? Even as we continue in the mapping process, we starting to get information. We need to improve things. So I promise you, I will try to do the theory as fast as possible. I don't know if it's going to be 10 minutes or not, but we'll do our best. So there are all kinds of flow charts and processes and diagrams you can use to understand your business, etc. Right? For the purposes of this discussion, we're really going to be using streamline diagram. However, I want to explain to you and show you 3 other diagrams because it will help you to sort of let's turn this into basically flowchart 101, right? Where you come away not only with the understanding of some improvements, but also just general flow charting and how it can be useful to you. So the flow charts we have here, context, functional, cross-functional or swim lane, and process flow, they're organized in the order of detail, right? So for example, context, very low detail, process flow chart, very high detail, right? So context diagram, to give you an example, I'm trying to understand how your company works, right? I've never worked with you before. So we can sit there and talk about it for hours. We drawing out, different paperwork, etc., trying to understand how things work. Or you can just show me, this is you, this is outside parties, and what are the things being exchanged, right? In simple terms. This should take 15, 20 minutes, right? You can improve on it later, but you can do it 15, 20 minutes, give it to the person, and they, even if they know nothing about your company, they have an understanding now, right? This is, by the way, is crucial for onboarding new employees because they can quickly figure out what's happening in the company, right? And if whoever the audience is, if for them this chart is enough, there's no need to spend more time on anything else, right? This is the information they needed. You can move on. Since this is cash flow, we're going to talk about the customer part, right? So I'm going to drill into the next chart, which is a bit more detailed. So as I said, customer, right? Again, let's say I don't know who your customer interacts with within your company. You can show me immediately, okay, I have a billing department, merchant department, right? Whatever the departments are, and what's being exchanged, right? And maybe like, this diagram, someone else is involved. But right now, immediately within 15, 20 minutes, you draw this out, got it, right? So now the next diagram is the one we're going to discuss in detail, is the one that is more applicable to our scenario. It's called, swim lane or cross-functional. Cross-functional because swim lane because it's like a swimming pool, right, with lanes. The process goes from left to right. The cross-functional because you see here, those are the dividing lines are departments, right? You could be a small company of 3 people, and this could be one person per department. It doesn't really matter. We care more about cross-functional. So for example, if one person acts as a merchant department, even if it's one individual, it's still a department really, because that's their function, right? And this part, even though here, for example, it shows customer, right, makes a purchase. This is really back office, right? How the process moves through the back office. Why do I say that? Because, for example, when we have customer makes a purchase, from their perspective, what does it look like, right? So they make a phone call, to request your service. They go online to buy whatever the process is, right? That is why I always place customer journey on top of the flowchart. Why? Because we want to make sure that the customer journey is, happy one, right? Because the happy customer returns. And just today I made a post on LinkedIn actually about that, where you spend so much money acquiring a customer, and it's a cost of acquisition, right? And don't you want them to come back and purchase more, request more services, etc., right? Especially if it's a B2B relationship where you can have a client for life, right? You want to have what's called lifetime value, right, of a customer, how much you get revenue from them. You want it to be, more than what you spend on them, right? Plus, in B2B business specifically, you might lose a customer that is very hard to replace. If your customer is AT&T, it would be extremely difficult to, you'll need to multiple customers to replace that revenue, multiple clients to replace, which means also your cost of service, customer support, labor, etc., goes up because now you're servicing more multiple contact points. Okay, so this is extremely crucial to be aware of customer journey, right? Now, this process flow chart, I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but this is the one I think most people think about when they think process, flow charts in general. So, very complex. This is actually extremely useful. So, for example, let's say if you're a small company, right? You don't have time to draft complex procedural manuals, etc. If you do this, let's say, for example, let's say it's a customer support flow chart, right? If you do this flow chart, which again, this can be done super quickly, right? If you know the process, and I'm your new employee, this would be perfect for me on day one, right? Because I'll put it next to my desk. A phone call comes in, I pick up. At least I can, if I get stuck on something, I can figure out, right? And it could save you a lot of time and money, right? We're gonna discuss later that sometimes no one can draw that chart completely 100%, and that's problem starts. So now let's move on to practice. want to come back to this picture, right? So we discussed before that, I like to see it as a whole process, but there are really sub-processes in there. I also added here a picture to show you what kind of different process people divide in, right? I want to remind everyone that very often in a lead to cash cycle, customer support is not mentioned, and especially if your customer support is part of onboarding, forget if something goes wrong and the customer support is not providing perfect help, clients and customers leave because of customer support, and it's that's not news, right? So customer support is truly part of sales team and part of lead to cash cycle, right? So very often, like at this point, there might be arguments about what kind of chart to use to describe the process. I'll be honest with you, to me personally, it doesn't really matter whether you want to use a swim lane diagram, if you want to use something more like flow chart, like a sales funnel, whatever it is, right? It doesn't. I really, it doesn't really matter. However, you will see here that the 3 points I'm going to bring up, no matter which flow chart you use, how you decide to map it out. Number one is who's accountable for each stage, right? So if you find a stage, and we're going to discuss this later in the presentation, for every stage, you need an accountable person. So that's going to be my question number one. Number two, what's a KPI? So what are you tracking? And very often people think, KPIs, sales people only make 100 calls, visit on customers, whatever the story is, right? However, that's not true. Like, for example, customer support, if a phone call comes in, how long customer stays on the phone on hold, let's say, right? Is it a minute? Is it half a minute? Now you have, as a manager of customer support, you have a KPI, right? You want it to be, let's say, 30 seconds. I'm making up the number, but right. So this is truly, everyone needs a number, so they know what they're being tracked on, evaluated on, etc. Right. And the final one, but last but not least, right? You see here that I put, whether it's horizontal to chart, vertical chart, I put everywhere customer journey. And the reason being is that no matter what you do, at the end of the day, what is the purpose of it all? You want to have a happy repeat customer, right? Otherwise, it's all irrelevant. So now we're moving to 30, 60, 90, days. This is purely done to sort of set the mindset that this is a timeline, like this needs to be done. It does not mean you have to do it in 30, 60, 90. It's up to me. Anything cash flow related must be done immediately, right? But we all have different resources. I'm going to talk about that part in the last slides. But this is purely just the time frame is yours, right? So the 30 days. So the most important part is step number one. You document your process as is. And I want to repeat as is, because you don't want to have realizations, aha moments, start criticizing, giving feedback on the process, saying I can't believe we're doing it this way, right? This is all only derail the process, and the entire team will just stop responding to this whole procedure, right? So as a side note, what to pay attention to when you're documenting, and that's why swim lane diagram is so helpful. If you every time, let's call it in a proverbial client file, whether it's digital or paper, every time the folder crosses, the file crosses the department line, whether it's 100 people per department or one human being, every time this happens, the chances of mistakes go up, delays, etc. And I usually say that if your swim lane looks like a heart rate, right, you have an issue. But the most important part is, I want to point out that as you go into this process, you must think of every time you find something, let's call it negative for now, right? you should treat it as wonderful news. And I'm not being, playful. I truly mean it, because you found it and now you can fix it. There is no point to get upset. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who didn't do what? That's already irrelevant, right? You found it. Now you can fix it, right? And also, if the spirit of it, where people get excited to find things, then the entire company will be basically searching, right? So the next step is identify who's accountable for each stage of the process, right? As discussed before. So again, you might be slightly disappointed to find out that some stages do not have accountable person, or there might be no clarity on who's accountable. Again, treat it as wonderful news, make a note and move on, right? All the realizations and all the things you learn, document them for sure, because we'll need the information, but there's no point right now to start causing trouble. So now determine which KPIs are being tracked for each stage, right? Again, you might find out nothing is being tracked. Great, make a note, move on. When I say what the KPI is being tracked, I'm looking for like 1-2 KPIs, right? 1 or 2, not more. It could be 3 maybe, for depending on business, etc. But I would rather have those KPIs separate between different people, and to have someone truly be responsible for 2 KPIs, let's say, versus 10 KPIs, and it's possible for them to keep track of it. And when I say keep track of it, number one is this is the point of establish visibility. So how do you see KPIs? And that's why it's important for people to have fewer KPIs, especially if you don't have like automated tracking, like reporting systems. If it's more or less manual, they need to enter it into some system, update it, something, whatever the story is, right? So how do you see it? Because they might all have wonderful KPIs and they're all on track. If you don't know about it, you can't act on it, right? The other part is verify the accuracy. By that I don't mean fake data, right? Fake numbers. I mean, for example, if you go into, let's say, if you just for the argument's sake, you have Google Doc. We'll take the simplest scenario. You have Google Doc. You go in there, and each salesperson lists how many phone calls they made, right? So we're taking like the low tech solution, right? Are you 100% sure you're looking at did they update it today? Is it from yesterday? Is it from 3 weeks ago? Are the numbers reliable, right? So that's important. Now, the next part is benchmark the time. So we're not talking precise, down to a second. We just need to have a general understanding. Like I mentioned before, if a customer calls, on average, right, our time is, let's say, 30 minutes, 30 seconds, sorry, on hold, right? Hopefully not 30 minutes. So that's our average, okay? Uh, you might hear some number there that you're not gonna like. You find out like sometimes customer there for 5 minutes, whatever the story is, just write it down and move on. We will fix it, right? So during this process, the only time you really like get involved in fixing the process, if you truly find something that is detrimental, right, or like damaging customer relationships, and then of course you can't like wait for the improvements to fix right away. But otherwise, you can't improve the entire process anyway, because you're just gonna get stuck, right? And that is why the last point is document the customer journey, right? As well, document it. If you see something terrible happening, of course fix it, but otherwise just document it as is. So we're all doing as is, because we don't want the team to feel this is a witch hunt, right? That we're trying to find guilty parties. It's already too late to look for guilty parties. We're right now looking into the future. Okay, so now the first 30 days were internal, right? We want to understand how things are internally. The 60 days, we're now doing the part of it is external. And by the way, if you have resources, the 30 days and part of 60 days can be done in unison, right? Parallel to each other, right? Because the first steps are understand what benchmark numbers are normal for your industry. So your competitors, how long it takes, person to call, to respond, to assign, etc., etc., etc. Right? So it doesn't mean it could be your competitors are not, You might have the best numbers in the industry, and this is great news. But you just need to understand, what we're comparing to, right? Because I promise you that you might be perfect compared to competitors in 99% of things. There's going to be something where they do better than you and you can learn from them, right? Instead of reinventing the wheel. Same thing with customer journey. Understand, for example, your competitor, what is the customer journey they have. And again, they might have something that is not actually good and you're doing it better. But that gives you a benchmark. The purpose is like, what are we trying to improve, right? Because if we have nothing to improve, everything's perfect, then there's no need to waste money, right? So now, because of the 30 days you collected information internally, and now with 60 days, you have information to compare to, for lack of a better word, us versus them, right? And that is why now you're starting to assess efficiency and effectiveness, meaning that you go, all right, it takes them 1 minute to answer the phone call. It takes us 3 minutes for a customer to actually speak to someone. And in the next slide, I'm going to explain that sometimes it is what it is, basically. And there is a reason why, but you now have a better understanding. And also, if you speak to the team or employee explaining why things must be done better, it's much easier to discuss this by saying, look, this company is kind of like, this is their numbers, this is us, something is not right, or etc., right? Same thing with bottlenecks. So the important thing about bottlenecks is that if you have a 6-lane highway, right, but you have on that highway have a bridge that is 4 lanes wide, guess what? At the end of the day, the speed of the traffic will be controlled by that 4-lane bridge, right? So if you want to speed up your highway, 6-lane, you're not gonna add two more. You're not gonna add 2 more lanes, right? And make it 8-lane highway. What you need to do is you need to widen the bridge, right? And that's, if you notice, very often that's what happens, right? The city starts, widening the bridges, right? Because they understand what the bottleneck is. Same thing in business, right? And you start addressing bottlenecks from the beginning of the funnel, so to speak, towards the end, right? And move the process along, right? So this point now, ensure the process aligns with overall business goals. And this is very important because sometimes you might have, for example, customer support that is perfect. By perfect, I mean every customer raves and says how great customer support is. However, after analysis, you realize that it takes you 3 times the people it should take you to take care of those customers, right? What becomes clear? You cannot scale. You cannot scale up because you'll just keep on growing labor. Resources will go towards customer support. And the difference between growth and scaling is when you grow, your expenses, costs kind of proportionately follow more or less the revenue, right? The ratios. The trick isn't scale up. It's basically when you, let's say, triple your revenue, but you don't also triple your expenses. Like cost of, So we want to make sure that what the process we have is not only a great process, but it's also repeatable and scalable, right? Then we know we can grow. Otherwise, it might be better off staying at the same revenue, because otherwise we're gonna burn out and it will burn the cash. Again, document all the assumptions, all the constraints as you're going through this process, right? Some things you might get ideas that could be great ideas. They might not be worth, investing cash into them right now. They're not crucial, but you want to write them down, because guess what? In the future, when you have resources of time, you can actually apply those ideas, right? This point, the final point is on the slide is that it will probably save you the most money than anything. So if you gather feedback from stakeholders, right? So when I say stakeholders, I do not necessarily mean only managers. I care more about people from, so to speak, frontline, who actually do the work daily, to give me their feedback and what needs to improve in the process. And I can guarantee you in, let's say, good 15 years that I'm doing this, I have not failed once. If you make your employees, every employee in the company, comfortable to share their ideas, to be open about things, provide feedback, and they truly, honestly, genuinely feel that they being appreciated and their opinion is valued, it will open up a floodgate of ideas. And I mean, great ideas, genius ideas that no consultant will ever provide you with, right? Because they actually do the work. So you have the brain power. You just need to make sure that you allow them to speak up, right? Now the 90 days. So this point is actually the resources, and I want to give you an example that actually I've seen before, but I'm gonna kind of make it larger than what it was. Imagine, for example, you have customer support, and it takes your customer support 1 minute to pick up the like truly get a customer to a person, right? Let's say 1 minute. And for your competitor, it takes, let's say, 30 seconds, right? On paper, it looks like, okay, obviously we're not doing as well, right? It's a big difference. However, upon further research, you realize that your competitor was cash injected from, let's say, private equity fund, and they have 3, 4, 5 times the people, customer support people, than you have. So you cannot, at this moment in time, meet their KPI, the one they have, right? Because they see people sitting around, let's say, doing nothing and just waiting for a phone call, versus your people on the call on calls nonstop, right? You might find software solutions, AI, routing, etc., right, to alleviate this a little bit. However, the most important part is if you come to your team without doing the research and just tell them, listen, we all suck. Our competitor does that in half the time. And you're talking to someone who's working long hours, maybe weekends, and this will be extremely demotivating to the team, because it's adding insult to injury, right? So and you do not want to do that, right? So make sure first you have actually the resources to hit the KPI as your competitor, right? You start implementing internal process, and you start implementing customer journey improvements. And the reason I separate them, because even though they are the improvements, they're not the same in a way of, this is back office, right? This is actually customer facing, or rather the way customer sees you truly, right? So sometimes we might have an improvement in the back office the customer knows nothing about and doesn't really care, all right? So you need to decide where you want to invest cash. Yes, we might buy some sort of fancy software that will make something, whatever the effect was. But if that does not change the customer journey and you're losing customers, churn is high, I really don't care about that part, right? So evaluate it and figure out what's the end goal. And the end goal is what? Lifetime value, high value lifetime value of a customer, returning customer. Always, even though I say 30, 60, 90, it is really ongoing process, right? You need to constantly reevaluate the process, to review things, etc., right? And I don't mean just measuring KPIs. That is not negotiable. You're doing that nonstop. But you need to basically have check-in with the process, and it does not necessarily means that you have a bad process. Now you have to review it again. Sometimes you can have a perfect process. However, you realize a new technology tool came out, and I mean AI right now. I know it's fashionable. AI sometimes solves things that will take 5 people, right? So you want to make sure that you're not, doing things for lack of better or old-fashioned way, right? You want your team to be involved in things they truly needed, and no AI can do, right? So keep on reviewing the process, evaluating, right? Within reason, right? So, and the last point, of course, measure, measure, measure. right? Because if we don't, the KPI, that's why I said you need like one, two KPIs per person, per accountable. You want them to be truly to be, live and die by that number, and they know that they're being evaluated by that number, and everything else will follow. So what are the next steps? So the next steps are truly you need to start doing this process. When do you need to start? As soon as possible. So that's why I do this webinar weekly, right? And we're going to be adding like case studies actually from anonymously. So if you want to be on a case study, you can reach out to me privately. I'll work with you, and we'll basically present your case on a workshop, but your company will not be mentioned, for privacy reasons. And do not worry about perfection in this. It's more important for you to start than to figure out what software to use. You can do everything I just described on a piece of paper, right? And you can make it perfect later. Don't try to basically paralysis by analysis, right? So if you have any questions for me, please reach out to me, and I'm obviously on LinkedIn. I've opened an account where you can send messages to me, and I will do my best to answer. And yeah, let's get to work. Thank you very much. See you next week.